to address you today as we pay tribute to Jack Arthur Vance. The Vance, the Scott, the Kane, and the Sutton families, thank you for being here today and thinking about everything that you remember about Jack. When I started thinking about the comments I wanted to make today when Jeannie asked me to speak, I thought about the many different roles that Jack played in his life. Certainly, service to his country was a hallmark of his life. He did 5 tours of duty in Vietnam. The first in 1962, when he was sent there to help train the South Vietnamese people to assist them in the conflict with the North Vietnamese. He then returned in 1964 to train them as to how to fly helicopters. He returned in 1966, and by that point the conflict had escalated, so he was involved in combat duty. He also returned again in 1969 and 1973. Jack didn't talk much about those combat experiences. I'm confident that he saw many horrible things. But he did tell me once that most of the time that he spent in Vietnam was actually pretty boring. He was always waiting for something to happen. But then when it did happen, it was moments of sheer terror. I always thought that influenced the way we all knew Jack, because he was pretty laid back once he came here. And I think that was because the experiences that he had now after Vietnam were unlike what he experienced there. The best example that I can give you of a time that I saw Jack very calm under pressure was when Todd was about 5 or 6 years old. Jeannie and Jack and Lori and I and Todd and our oldest Devin had gone to Lake Mead and rented a houseboat. We had gone to bed one night and a storm came up, a very aggressive storm, and the houseboat was swept off of the shore. All of us were asleep when it happened. And there were waves. I didn't know lakes could have waves like that. But the houseboat was almost tipping on its side. Jeannie, Lori, the kids were totally freaking out, as was I. Jack was calm in the middle of the storm. We're going to get through this. He just took that boat. The one thing he forgot was the lines that tied it down got into the prop. And then we were in the middle of it with no engine. So what we did, we just rode it out until we were on the opposite side of the lake and got off the boat. The boat was totally destroyed. The ski boat had sunk. But Jack was like, what's the big deal? The anti-war sentiment that existed in the late 1960s and the early 1970s, though, was tough on Jack and the other heroes and patriots that returned home from the war. Vietnam was not a popular war. Our soldiers were often ridiculed when they returned home. They were not celebrated as they should have been. And looking back on it, it seems to me that maybe that was a creation of the press. And for those of us, not the millennials, but for those of us, I think that may be the first example of fake news. As you know, family was very, very, really important to Jack. First, he was a son and a brother to Sally and Mike. Then he got introduced to the Scott family. And he liked the Scott family so much that he actually married into it twice. First, he was married to Jeannie's cousin, Darlene, and that marriage took place in the early 1960s. Tragically, shortly after they were married, Darlene was killed in a car accident. Jack's immediate family, though, was the most important feature of his life. Following his 1966 tour of duty in Vietnam, Jack learned that Jeannie was working as a cashier at the Tustin car wash. He decided he was going to go down and chat her up. When he got there, there was a long line in front of the window she was working at. So he got into the line. Jeannie saw it. She waved. Nothing. She winked. Nothing from Jack. He seemed to be totally daydreaming at that moment. When he got up to the front of the line, he acted so surprised that Jeannie was there. He made it out to be the huge coincidence that he would happen to run into her at the Tuscan car wash. For years, Jeannie believed that that meeting was complete happenstance until Jack finally came clean with her and said he had set the whole thing up. I first met Jack in December of 1973. It was Christmas Eve. Jack surprised Jeannie by just showing up at their apartment in Tustin when he was supposed to be on duty in Okinawa. He knew how hard his service to the military was on Jeannie. He had prepared for her that night a framed commendation for her service to the country, thanking her for her duty. I've now spent 46 Christmas Eves with Jeannie, and I would hazard a guess that that one just might be her most favorite Christmas ever. Jack cared for and protected Jeannie for many, many years, always doing what he could to make her comfortable, supported, and loved. In the recent years, his illness affected his ability to care for Jeannie in the way he always had. Jeannie became his caregiver. For the most part, at least from what I observed, I think he was pretty good at being a compliant patient. Jack always raised Scott as though he was his own, and then when Todd was born, Jack had someone who would carry on the Vance name. Jeannie and Jack celebrated their 48th wedding anniversary this past December. Jack took Jeannie out to dinner that night, even though he felt lousy, even though he didn't want to go. He did it so he wouldn't disappoint Jeannie. Jack's extended family included his army of grandchildren, nieces, and nephews, all of whom were very important to him. I'm reminded of two stories with my own kids that demonstrate that. When our kids were small, we had a small condo out in Palm Desert. Jeannie and Jack would often be guests there. Most mornings, Jack would get up early, and my son Grant, at the time I think around 4, he and Grant would sit out on the back patio watching the golfers go by and talking about the ways of the world. Jack always had coffee, and one morning Grant asked why he couldn't have coffee. What did Jack do? He immediately shot down to the market, bought a mini coffee cup and saucer, wrote Grant's name on it, and from that day forward, Grant always had his little boy coffee. In talking about Jack the other day, Grant told me he still has that cup and saucer. The other example, much more recent example, a couple years ago, my daughter Catherine got married. Jack's illness was really starting to take a toll on him. He'd lost a lot of weight. Jack insisted that he would attend, even though he struggled being in public places because of the noise levels. To make matters worse, Catherine had a formal wedding, and he had to rent a tux. Jeannie had a lot on her plate that day. She had to get herself ready. She had to get her mom ready. She had to get Jack ready. So she got Jack ready first. We had made arrangements so that they would be transported by a golf cart from their hotel room over to the venue where the wedding was being held. When they arrived at the wedding venue, about the same time as all the guests, Jack got out of the golf cart and his pants fell to his ankles. In her haste, Jeannie had forgotten to put the belt on. The recent months have been tough. They were tough on Jeannie, but way tougher on Jack. They tackled those months with love, compassion, and a real respect for one another. Jack's quality of life was not good recently. Typically, he and Jeannie would come to our house on Sunday afternoons so that Jeannie could spend time with her mom. Each Sunday when they would arrive, I would note a further deterioration of Jack from the prior Sunday. Although it sounds trite, he truly is in a better place now. He's without pain, he's without weakness, he's without confusion. Although it's hard to say our goodbyes, today's goodbye is only temporary. We will all see Jack again someday. In the interim, you have memories of Jack. The memories I've described, the memories that Scott's going to describe in a few minutes, and many other memories of your own. Safe journey, Jack. Congratulations on a job well done and a life well lived.